You know, born first generation here, I the only thing that I was conscious of was my behaviour in the home, because my parents were, they're from original disciplinarian stock. Right?
Stock. Yes,
I'll just put it like that. But in my daily life, it didn't really help. I had to learn to assimilate without thinking I was assimilating, because I didn't have that kind of thought when I was a child. But it started to change when I got to 16. I got a bit more freedom. I was working. I used to go down Pixmore, Old Nation Cafe. Used to go to Blues. I used to go to the Blues just for the music and to watch toasters like Jesse Smith. I started there at 16 years old, and I just drifted into that because my dad worked in the steelworks, and I wasn't really educated. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I've never really had dreams. So
That's
because I daydream. Because actually, I didn't have much of an imagination in that way. So when Bob Marley, Burning Spear come along, of course that's mind-blowing. I think that's mind-blowing for a lot of people, but it was massive for me. It became my life.
People, you're now watching the Daily Devotion Podcast, the space where we connect and engage with creatives from various industries to share insights on their journey thus far.
Yeah, so you look at London, Bristol, Manchester, Birmingham, Cardiff, Leeds. Nobody has got a building like this. Okay, it's still owned by the local authority, and we're working on that. But, I know that Sedaka isn't everybody's cup of tea. For a whole host of reasons. Some of those are historical. And I know there are other groups within our communities that are fighting for other spaces and want to be a part of another space other than Sedaka. But whilst we're there, in one way or another, we all have to learn how to embrace it, because that could be a serious asset. Like when Brooke came and you spent all that time, helping Brooke to develop his little business there. That's what it takes. It takes for somebody just to walk through the door and see what they can do with his space.
Have a vision.
Look at that space that Brooke had.
Yeah,
that space, it's not had a lick of anything but dust and crumbling timbers and crumbling
then he
concrete.
went in there with the mind, injection, whatever else.
A nice one of the best spaces in the building.
In the building.
Yeah.
Kitchen, inbuilt kitchen, everything in there.
That's right. And, at the moment we've got another youth group in there, down there every Tuesday, a creative group. You should be involved with them. Okay. They're young artists.
Okay.
And they're doing tremendous things.
And there's Tyra as well, who's got her hair shop in there.
That's right. The hair shop. We've got a number of mental health products in there. Because mental health it's a big thing. It's much bigger than what a lot of us are prepared to admit, and fair enough, because it's scary, and you can make yourself vulnerable. But yeah, we're involved with a good number of mental health projects.
So yeah, I think a lot of what you're talking about here is, one, identity, but two, the preservation of the identity. Talking about identity, obviously I'm a man of longevity, wisdom, tiger bones around his neck. No, what was your upbringing like? Obviously your parents were born in Jamaica. What did that look like up until your teens? Because you're having to identify a time where, 70s into the 80s, where there's a lot of racial oppression, a lot of them NF man, them skinheads, them man there. So like, what did life look like for like yourself and your siblings growing up?
Born first generation here, the only thing that I was conscious of was my behaviour in the home, because my parents were, they're from original disciplinarian stock. Right?
Stock. Yes,
Well, I'll just put it like that.
Yeah.
And so I had to be aware of who and what I was in the home. I'm not saying I was perfect, I wasn't. But when I was out, I was unconscious about racism. I couldn't articulate it, because I didn't know how to articulate it. But I was born at Nether Edge, and I think before I was one, I was living at Attercliffe, and we got bounced around from one, as I said, Rackmattack landlord to another. And then at 8 years old, in 1968, we moved to Parcel Cross.
Oof. Briefly tell people about Parcel Cross.
Well, I will come. Let me just come back to that, because you see, that was our first council house. And in 1968, it wasn't called Sheffield City Council, I think it was Sheffield Metropolitan Council, or something like that. It was Sheffield City. They were not renting to black families. And I think there was literally a handful of black families that got houses rented to them. So what had happened was, my mum, don't know how, but my mum's very well networked, and she knew this reporter from Sheffield Telegraph.
Brilliant.
And they were having a conversation. She found out that the reporter found out that my mum was about to be unfairly evicted again by this landlord who wanted to sell the house underneath them. And this reporter did a little campaign, did a bit of research. She found out that the way that this landlord had bought the house, through a loan from the Sheffield Metropolitan Council, that he wasn't allowed to sell. So she started this campaign. The council couldn't really ignore a white journalist.
Yes.
So, cut a long story short, she won this campaign and got my mum rehoused, so she wouldn't have to worry about being evicted. I remember walking the streets, 5, 6 years old, around Attercliffe, looking for somewhere to live. Well, obviously I wasn't conscious I was looking for somewhere to live at the time. I thought we'd just start having a laugh and walking the streets. But what my mum was actually doing was finding a house before my dad came home from his shift. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Now, to learn that, when you get older, you think, oh, wow, how does it goes out? I had my youngest brother in the pram, 2 younger sisters, me, an older sister, an older brother, all walking the streets. Those are the things that we had to deal with. Now the landlord wasn't calling us the M word, but that's how he was treating us.
Yeah, I called the may as well have been.
His behaviour was, his words wasn't, but his behaviour was. And so I think the council got embarrassed into housing us, and I think they must have thought, I know what we'll do with these Negroes. We'll ship them out to Parson Cross, see how long they last there.
Yeah, they won't survive up there, will they? Predominantly white area, skinheads, rough round there still.
Yeah, but as it happens, we moved there in 1968, and my mum still lives there in the same house. She bought it. Early 1980s, she bought it. And she bought it as a matter of principle.
To say,
that's her piece of England.
Yeah.
I for me place this, I for me.
Yeah.
Alright?
Yeah.
And do you know, apart from some stuff at school, I personally didn't have a lot of the raw racism thrown at me. There were some things at school, but I mean,
odd sniggers, aren't there?
I don't often been called the M word, that didn't happen, but we were a large family.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the stereotype of black people kind of helped that situation, but there were 7 of us.
Yeah.
Ranging from
a pack,
newborn to 10 years old.
Straight. Yeah. Entourage.
There were a series of large families on the street where my mum lives, where we lived, and we got on. In hindsight, my mum and dad did a lot of work around race relations. They used to hold house parties and invite the whole neighbourhood and beyond. We were famous for house parties throughout the 60s and 70s into the 80s. And my mum and dad afforded all the food to feed a house full. People, I'm talking 40 plus people. Yeah? how they afforded all the food for that was just cooked throughout the night and ongoing, and all the drinks. I don't know how they afforded that, but they did, and I think that that went a long way to us getting on and being accepted, if you like, because it is about being accepted, and then there's also an element of assimilation. What else do you do in a 99.9% white area? I mean, Parson Cross in the 60s, well, up until recent times, was the largest social housing estate in Europe. It's a massive estate, stretches from, just below Grenoside, right over to Shire Green, which then joins Winterbank. That's how big.
It is.
It's a big estate. But of course, we were around. I went to Chiltern School. My first school was Maynell School at 8 years old, and that was a great experience. But at Chiltern School, not so great experience. I survived, and not. It wasn't so much the racism from my peers. It was the institutional stuff from the school where I wasn't being educated.
Correctly, yeah.
I was just allowed to bum around because, they weren't focusing my mind. So,
Was that the same for everybody else, though? Or do you feel like it was a particular group of people in a certain time of history that were poorly educated?
No, it wasn't unusual, but there was a chosen few in that school. There was a group of people who came to that school who were very well educated, who became bankers, became architects.
There's always
became
few,
civil servants. They will be from every school. And so Chiltern School has never had a great reputation. I think it's a much better performing school now. Now it's an academy, but it's never had a great reputation. So I don't think I was particularly singled out. I had when I started Chiltern School as the youngest of the family at that time. I've got 4 younger brothers and sisters who were at primary school then, but I had an older brother and sister when I started in '72. They had a fine time, but I won't mention which one, but I know at least one of them was dyslexic. They just thought that they were nice. They didn't really educate them, find out what the issues were, and so they just had to again survive.
So obviously in that environment, you speak about obviously assimilation, trying to fit in, trying to be accepted in a 99.9 predominantly white area. Who were your role models then? Because obviously they weren't like on street, and I don't even just mean like in terms of a community, I mean in terms of the sound system, and who were you identifying with as a young black man coming up in a place which looks nothing like you?
Well, before I was 16, I wasn't allowed to move out of Parson Cross. I just went to school. That was it. I didn't even go, we couldn't go into town at the weekends, city centre, and toss around the gallery and the markets that were. So I never moved far from home. But who were my role models? Muhammad Ali.
Shit.
Everybody knew Muhammad Ali. Yeah. When he was boxing and I was a kid, people came round to my dad's house, to my mum's house, and his friends, obviously male friends, came round, and they
sit and watch.
They became role models.
Yeah.
Because they all used to come dressed like they just stepped off at Hollywood Boulevard.
Clean,
quality shoes, sharp,
polished.
Everybody, nobody wore jeans in them days, so everybody's in suit, hats, scarves,
tie, everything,
quality leather shoes. You know what I mean? They was my role models, my dad's friends. But although we weren't into celebrity in those days, but Muhammad Ali, I remember how he used to talk of his experience and how he used to talk to white journalists, and interviewers, and just talk freely and be totally confident. But that didn't really, it helped me psychologically, but it didn't really help me, in that you felt pride, seeing, Muhammad Ali, the baddest man on the planet at the time, But in my daily life, it didn't really help. I had to learn to assimilate without thinking I was assimilating. you know, because I didn't have that kind of thought when I was a child. But it started to change when I got to 16. I got a bit more freedom. I was working. I used to go down Pixmore, Old Nation Cafe, used to go to blues. You know, I used to go to the blues just for the music and to watch toasters like Jesse Smith. You know, sadly he passed a good number of years ago. But, you know, I used to just go and just stand there. I wasn't a smoker. I didn't do drugs. You know, I wasn't a drinker. I just listened to the music. And that's where I started to hear for the first time Rasta music. Because although I was brought up on reggae music, none of my mum and dad's music was reggae. It was Rasta music. Because Rastas were social pariahs in Jamaica. So they wouldn't have that. You know, and even though my mum's from Kingston, you know, my dad's a countryman, Trelawney, but they didn't have no Rasta music. I was the first to set Rasta music in the house at 16. Yeah, you know, Bob Marley, Natty Dread album. And a white guy from up the street from me in Parson Cross came up the road and said, play this. I said, who is it? What is it? He said, don't worry about it. I said, just play it. A guy called Lee. He was my older brother's friend. And I went in the house and I played this album, which I now know is Natty Dread. And from there, my life changed. You know, I had a thirst for knowledge, a thirst for finding out information about who and what I am, why I function in the way that I do, you know, and why others function in the way that they do. But I was in my early 20s before I could start to articulate it. You know, even though I got all these wonderful lyrics and tunes from Bob Marley, you know, like So Just Say, you know, but in particular I remember that, you know, So Just Say, not one of my youths will sit on the sidewalks and beg bread, because we couldn't sit on sidewalks.
And beg,
you know what I mean? Yeah. And it wasn't until I got into my early 20s when I started to get much more confident in myself and could start to articulate some of my thoughts around racism and expressions of not tolerating it.
So, listen, everybody, like, comment, please. Leave your comments in the comment section, because these are narratives that we need to discuss. I want to know your thoughts. We are keen to expand this conversation further. All right, then, we're talking about knowledge and obviously articulating yourself as you're going into your 20s now. Obviously, you're a man that stands heavily on identity, you know, roots, history. You say that you wasn't really in the fighting too tough, and your experience was different. So the way that you would dispel your, let's say, lack of assimilation at times was to educate yourself. How was you doing that? Like books or what film, through what? Because obviously the mainstream isn't teaching us these things, these core things about us. So where did you get those principles from for education about oneself?
Yeah, because, you know, when I talk about the assimilation, it wasn't something like that I constantly chose. You know, that was whilst I was under the, you know, under the cosh and under the control and upbringing of my parents. But I always knew that I wasn't like my white friends, because my life was in the home, as I said before, and we were always reminded that we were different, and that we had to work twice as hard to get anything. But I'd always been under this impression, even as a young teenager, I'm thinking, how the hell am I going to work twice as hard as somebody who I already think I'm not as good as? Yeah, I just didn't see how I could do it, so that didn't bother me too much. But it was about, my first source of information was music. Music. And then I used to take little pieces from the music and then try and read up on it. So
smart,
right?
Smart.
So when I first heard Bernie Spear, I think I was 19, possibly 20, and his lyrics, Christopher Columbus was a damn blasted lie. And I thought, this guy's in for a lawsuit. You know, either he's telling the bang truth, or he's up for a lawsuit. So I started to do my research
and delve deeper into why they were saying that.
And ask questions. And so, you know, when I used to go down Pixmore, we used to meet Old Nations Cafe or in blues or we went to a house party, we used to have groundings. It'd just be a group of us just stood talking.
Yeah.
You know, and sharing what we understood with this about this piece of information, and exploring how we validated information. And so, you know, you might say something, and someone will come and try and contradict you because you done a little Google search. It's like, look, you need to do a little bit more than that. But we didn't have Google them days. Yeah. And so we were getting different sources to validate this one thing, you know. And then you learn that, oh yeah, Bernard Spears, he's bang on here, you know. You know, he set off, you know, Columbus set off for India in the east, got lost, ended up in the west. I know that's a bit crude to take on this strip, but basically, you know, and that's why I won't call that part of the world the West Indies. I'll only make reference to that in terms of the cricket team.
Cricket team, and done.
You know, who are another set of our heroes. So actually,
yeah, if I'm going to touch upon that in a while, I just wanted to, because obviously, as like with anything in life, once you become more enlightened and have a better understanding, it changes the way that you carry yourself, the way that how you allow things to govern you, what you're governed by. So when you're growing up now, there might have been a bit more resistance now. Like, not wait a minute, I know, because I've read, I've done my due diligence, I've had the reasonings with my friends and family and whatever else. So what was that like navigating through a career then? Because it's all good and well amongst friends and your people, them and your reasoning, but when it starts to get into a sense of, do you know what, I need to start earning money now, how do you navigate through that? How did you, especially
not easily,
yeah,
because you know
your construction and your engineering, them times there, it's different, you know what I mean?
Well, I've never really seen my battle on the streets. I'm not a street fighter, and I didn't have to do much street fighting, but I never really saw that was my place to do battle anyway. Because being called the M-word, because of the way that they perceive I look, or not being served properly in a shop, that's light.
Yeah,
that's light in this pseudo-science of race, what they've created under this pseudo-science of race. That's easy bit. Now my first two jobs, I worked in engineering on a shop floor on Cemetery Road, Sheffield Twistro. I started there at 16 years old, and I just drifted into that because my dad worked in the steelworks, and I wasn't really educated. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I've never really had dreams. So, you know,
that's
because I didn't dream. Because actually, I didn't have much of an imagination in that way. So when Bob Marley, Bernard Spears come along, of course that's mind-blowing. I think that's mind-blowing for a lot of people, but it was massive for me. It became my life. And so what racism did for me, the worst thing it did for me as a child, was it didn't encourage me to read. I didn't read comics. Because actually, although they're all multi and technicolored, those were white depictions. They were depictions of whiteness. Yeah? And all the war comics that my mates used to read, again, they were just white guys, you know, fighting this war, this world war, which actually was only a European war, blah, blah. Yeah? And so...
he knows his stuff.
Well, it wasn't a world war.
He knows his stuff.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was a European war,
Yeah, well, I'm not being no disrespect to anybody who served in the war, but I think it's time now to have some real honest conversations, you know, and really to analyse what's actually happened in this world. Because what was happened 500 years ago impacts what we're still doing today. What happened on the plantation or before the plantations impacts what we're doing today. Otherwise, racism would have no place today. It would have burnt out like chattel slavery. Burn out, yeah? Now, and so that, you know, like Enid Blyton, you know, was one of the biggest children's writers of my time. Shocking racist. You know, she used the N-word in her books, stuff like that. You know, other authors too. And so the famous five and all of that, they were all white kids. What have they got to do with me?
I
So
can't
although I couldn't
identify with
articulate
you.
racism,
You
I
could
knew how
see
it impacted me.
Yeah.
Yeah? And so